Welcome to the video recording of the Wildlife Management Lecture for ESRM 352, Restoration Ecology. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about biodiversity as a driver of ecosystem restoration. We're going to be talking about consumers as restoration tools, or another way of putting that is restoring consumer functions. And then we're going to look at some case studies. While the majority of restoration management action is manipulating soils, hydrology, and vegetation, and this is what we've been talking about in the previous lectures, biodiversity has historically driven the majority of restoration management objectives, or what are we restoring to, why are we restoring, these sorts of questions. So this has to do with the historical use of the Endangered Species Act to further broader conservation agendas, a focus on wetland and riparian restoration, which is due to the fact that 60% of biodiversity in arid and semi-arid biome is associated with wetland and riparian areas, and our Mediterranean climate here in the Southern California coastal zone is semi-arid. And last but not least, a focus on charismatic species and more commonly charismatic megafauna in natural resource management. So when we think about restoring wildlife, there's two broad types of projects. The first being captive breeding programs and species reintroductions, commonly associated with conservation biology. And then in ecosystem restoration, there's habitat creation. Both of these are mostly focused on listed species, threatened and endangered species. If we think more broadly of consumers as restoration tools, or another way to put this, restoring consumer functions, what we're looking at is all the ways that the consumer communities maintain ecosystems. So examples of this is seed dispersal, and we've been talking a lot about seed dispersal and how to promote seed dispersal at restoration sites, invertebrate communities and pollination, and ensuring the viability of local populations over time, managing herbivory, removing herbivory, reintroducing herbivory, movement and dispersal corridors. So a lot of restoration may be focused on first identifying corridors and then restoring lands within those corridors, managing predator-prey dynamics, and trophic cascades. So an example of managing trophic cascades, one of the best examples really is the wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone. So wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park after being extirpated for 70 years. Now extirpation, what this means is that if a species was previously extant or previously existed in a certain region and then it no longer exists in that region, that species is considered extirpated, but not necessarily extinct globally. So during those 70 years where the wolves had been extirpated from Yellowstone National Park, significant changes to riparian vegetation had occurred. Once the wolves were reintroduced, then again, significant changes were seen in the riparian vegetation. And so you see here on the left this photo showing the riparian area when the wolves had been extirpated, and this is a riparian area after wolf reintroduction. And so in addition to the very obvious vegetation changes that you see much more riparian scrub and willow species. We can see some changes to hydrodynamics, sedimentation, water quality, small mammal habitat for riparian and cavity nesting birds. So what might explain this sort of change? Well, trophic cascades. Wolf predation causes changes in prey behavior, distribution, and abundance, interspecific competition, and ultimately changes in vegetation. So here we see the population of wolves over time from 1990 to 2010. So this increase in the population of wolves, decrease in the population of elk, and the decrease in the browse, increase in aspen height, increase in cottonwood, increase in willow. So a change not only in the distribution and abundance of the elk, which is the main species that is browsing on the aspen and cottonwoods and willows, but we also have a change in elk behavior, and that they're no longer grazing so frequently and so freely in the riparian corridors. So our second case study is on the Channel Island fox. Here in the ESRM department at CSUCI, most people are familiar with the island fox. It was listed endangered and a recovery plan was prepared. It included capturing remaining fox, to begin a captive breeding program, to capture golden eagles, remove feral pigs, reintroduce bald eagles, and then finally reintroduce the fox. So the historic population had been about 1,500, and at the time of listing and development of this recovery plan, in around 2004, the population had fallen on Santa Cruz Island to less than 100, and by about 2009, about 700, and by 2015, the island fox population on Santa Cruz Island had reached about 1,500. So by all accounts, a good and successful recovery plan. And so let's see, in addition to disease control and the captive breeding, let's look specifically at the golden eagle. So golden eagles had been preying on the Channel Island fox, and while they are native to California, they're not originally native to the island. The bald eagle was. And over time, the bald eagle had been extirpated, and the golden eagle had colonized the islands and were large enough to actually prey on the island fox. And so here we have, over time, fox survivorship from 1994, 95 to 99, and then 2001, 2002, 2003. So this long-term declining trend up to around 1999 or 2000. With the eagle removal over time, we see this positive trend in island fox population levels. Removing golden eagles was not at all a simple task, required extensive interagency coordination and permitting. It is itself a listed species, and so they had to trap and relocate those species. And so here we see the eagle territory, and here are the eagle capture location on Santa Rosa and on Santa Cruz Island. So removing this predator, in this case, had led to an increase in the island fox population, whereas before, reintroducing the predators leading to a decrease in elk population and therefore an increase in riparian vegetation. So our third case study is creating burrowing owl nesting habitat. Burrowing owls are ground nesting species, and we see two of them here in front of their nest, and they depend on the burrow activity of other species such as the California ground squirrel. So other species can start the burrow and they will develop and expand those burrows. This species has been threatened by development primarily, but also by removal of substrate heterogeneity such as from agriculture. So here we see an example, a project creating artificial nests for burrowing owls in the Otay Mesa of San Diego County. And burrowing owls traditionally nested in this area on mima mounds in vernal pool complexes. So here we see a vernal pool, and we've discussed vernal pools in this class before. And the mima mounds are the elevated areas in between the pools. However, the mound pool topography had been destroyed by agriculture at this particular site in the Otay Mesa. Note, by the way, that vernal pools are also habitat for other special status species, and we've talked about this before: tadpole shrimp, fairy shrimp, and the spadefoot toad, and a plethora of endemic plants. So in addition to recreating the mound pool topography, planting and seeding, inoculating vernal pools with tadpole and fairy shrimp, artificial nests were established to jumpstart colonization by burrowing owls. So it was not expected that these artificial nests would be what the owls would use primarily over time, but that it would help the burrowing owl get reestablished at the site or sustain viable populations over time. And here we see the project area and some of the artificial burrows shown in pink. So when comparing the artificial burrows and the natural burrows, there was a marginal difference in the number of chicks. 5.6 in natural burrows and 3.2 in artificial burrows. There was no difference in the number of fledglings, and the microclimate of natural and artificial burrows was to be examined in future research. And so this is part of the reading that you did from the San Diego Zoo. There were other habitat and prey differences attributed to difference between natural and restored sites, but the punchline is that the fledgling success when comparing artificial burrows to natural burrows is similar, and the argument therefore is that you can use artificial burrows as a habitat creation tool.